Hey guys, Omerko here, self-taught web developer. So we are continuing our journey through this Angular Essentials series. For you who don't know, Angular Essentials series is a series where I will show you each feature that Angular has to offer to us as developers, and also by the end of this series you will know at least basics of Angular and you will be able to go along with my other videos and create some real applications on Angular. So for this video I wanted to show you what is property binding. I will go into source and app here. If you remember, in my last video we worked a bit with components, so we added the top bar component in our main app component.html. First of all, I mentioned that I will talk first about the TypeScript as I didn't yet talk about it. Specifically about the TypeScript for our components. So here what we can see, this here is a basic TypeScript file, like a default file that we get from Angular itself upon creation of a component. So we have the import of component at the top, which is imported from Angular/core. So component should also be declared here. As you can see, at component. This at component declaration means that this whole file stands for the component itself. So the component itself could be this file here, or if I would go to a top bar, then we will see it in a top bar also. So what is component? So first of all, for component inside we should pass some options, obviously. First option that is usually passed is the selector of the component. For example, in a top bar we can see that the selector is app top bar. This app top bar could be used in our HTML as it is here, and that way we could import the top bar component into other components. We are selecting by this selector that component. Then we have our template URL. Template URL is the path to our HTML file for our specific component. For example, for my top bar component, I have topbar.component.html file that I could use, and it is nested in the same folder where this TypeScript file is. And if you look on the side, we can see that here is the HTML. We have also the CSS and that TypeScript file that we are currently looking at. For the style URLs, we could pass here an array of the style files that we could have. We have just the basic, like a normal style file that should be used here, which is the topbar.component.css. So these three files, HTML, CSS, and the TypeScript file that we are looking at currently, those all are making one component in Angular. Also, mostly the component will be nested in its own folder. So like this, as the top bar is. So going back to app HTML, and what if I wish here to pass h3, let's say. This h3 could be Jason Statham as an example, just the name of an actor. Taking a look into my browser now, I have top bar at the top and I have that Jason Statham text. Currently this Jason Statham text is passed, let me zoom in, you can see it better. Currently this Jason Statham text is passed just as a static text that we could use in our HTML. Property binding is something that it will offer us to bind our properties from TypeScript to the HTML, and based on that we could render dynamic data on our screen. To do that, in my component here, I will go to the TypeScript of the component, and you can see that I already have the property called title, which is set to the first Angular project title. This is a title. This title is created by default from the Angular once we created our project. I will create here new project, which is user name, and this here will be set to let's say John Doe. So this is a property that we could use in a JavaScript and also in a TypeScript. As we are using TypeScript, mostly you will also see this syntax: username, then 2 dots and string here, which means that this here, this username is a string, should hold a string value. If I change this John Doe now and I set it to a 0, for example, you will see this red line down below, and the error is type number is not assignable to type string. Obviously I assigned number here, and this username expects a string. So I will move this back to John Doe, and this will be correct. Also, in the newer versions of TypeScript, we don't really need to pass this this string here, this typing string, because if we set the value for the username John Doe, then this username will immediately know that it should expect string value. Also, if I use username, let's use last name for this example, and I just put dot and comma at the end just to finish up this, you will see 3 dots here. Remember, last name implicitly has an any type, which means that this here could be anything: string, number, array, whatever we wish. If you are using the last name, well, any property like this, I suggest you also here to specifically say the type, for example string, and this should be enough. So this is how you will use typings mostly, but we will talk about more about those once we come to models and typing in overall. Now that I have this username, I could go to my HTML, and there is the way to bind this username, this John Doe, to the H3 here. So here, if I wish to use that, I will need to use double curly braces here. So like this, and inside I could pass whatever I wish. For example, I could pass user name here, save that, and let's go to our browser. And now on my browser we don't see those curly braces, we don't see the username, but we see John Doe, because John Doe, well, the username was property bind from TypeScript to our HTML. So this means that this data here that we see, this John Doe text, is dynamic text now. So if you are working with the data, you could have a username of John Doe, you could have a different username. For example, changing your account could well, change your also username, for example to Jane Doe, and save that. Let's go to a browser, and now on our screen, as we property binded our username to our HTML heading, we can see that now it's a Jane Doe, not a John Doe anymore. So this is dynamically bind to our HTML. There are also other ways to bind our data. For example, I could have an input field. It could be a type of text, and here I could have a value. This value could be set, for example, to some name. In my browser, I could see that input field, right? And this here is a some name value that I have. I could change it, obviously. So even if I would refresh the page, this input field will hold this value because it has the pre-populated value. If we wish value inside of the input field to be dynamic for the example, here there is few ways that we could bind this value attribute to our property that we have, for example this username. So one of the ways is to remove this and put double curly braces in here and use user name here. Let's go into the browser now. Now in my browser we could see that Jane Doe is also passed to this input field. So now we can see that it is also property bind to this input field. Other way to use this, and honestly my favorite way, is to use these brackets around the value itself and pass here just user name without curly braces at all. If we would go now to our browser, we could see the same result. Jane Doe is still bind to this property. So you saw now how could you property bind also the attributes inside of the elements, like this value attribute. Let's say that I wish to use an image here. We have a source for the image, alt name could be just the image, and let's say that I wish for you to bind this source here. Let's do that together. First of all, I will go to in my TypeScript and create image path here, and I will set it to be a string and just pass some image here. Saving this, I could come back to my HTML now and I could property bind this source. For example, I could use these brackets around the source and just use image path here. Now what we can see, it's a little bit realigned. We have the input field down here, but the image itself is obviously visible on our screen. So this is the one-way binding in Angular. What it means that it is one-way, where we are binding from our TypeScript, our data, to our HTML. There is no way with this binding to bind from HTML to the TypeScript. For that we are using two-way data binding, and that I will show you in my next video. So, thank you all for watching. If you like what you saw, please click like and subscribe, as I'm posting new content weekly on this channel. Thank you once again, and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.